Right now, elections monitors from the international community are arriving in the United States, preparing to monitor the elections in the U.S. for the presidential election. Now, 44 monitors have showed up to watch the elections in swing states. Not the ones where, it's pretty much a lock where a Republican or a Democrat is going to win, but the ones in the swing states that could be subject to tampering, like in the past two elections, or pardon me, the 2000, 2004, and possibly 2008. Now, what's happened is these elections monitors who go to a lot of countries and to monitor elections to certify that they're fair and to make sure that the democratic process, or I should say democratic process, is carried out. Apparently, Texas is unwilling to have the international community monitor elections. State Attorney General Greg Abbott sent a letter to the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, threatening to arrest anyone who dares come into Texas and monitor the elections. Now, this is what the organization actually does, according to an RT article. Since the establishment of the OSCE in the 1970s, the organization has strived to ensure that democratic and lawful elections occur across the planet, routinely examining the political climate before voters take to the polls to make sure the ballots can be cast fairly and without complications in numerous countries across Europe and North America. The OSCE was recently extended an invitation to come stateside from several domestic groups, including the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, and the American Civil Liberties Union, among them others, because of what those organizations call an unprecedented and sophisticated level of coordination to restrict voting rights in our nation, due largely in part to a number of newly enacted laws that limit who and how they can cast a ballot. No doubt these statements are most likely aimed at the new voter ID laws, which do restrict certain people from being able to vote based on very superfluous things, even though it's actually been demonstrated that voter fraud in the United States is virtually non-existent. However, electronic voter fraud, as was actually adequately demonstrated in the documentary Hacking Democracy, which shows how the election was actually stolen in 2004, doesn't get investigated. But in terms of actual people going to vote, which would only be like one extra vote per person that was committing fraud anyway, whatever, as opposed to this huge electronic, mass theft of the election. But that's a whole different video. Now, the Texas is basically saying that if anyone, any kind of monitor, dares enter the nation and actually check to make sure that the elections are occurring in a fair and democratic way, they're going to arrest them. And this is exactly what they're saying. The OSCE may be entitled to its opinions about voter ID laws, but your opinion is legally irrelevant in the United States, where the Supreme Court has already determined that voter ID laws are constitutional, Abbott said. If OSCE members want to learn more about election processes so they can improve their own democratic systems, we welcome the opportunity to discuss the measures that Texas has implemented to protect the integrity of the elections, Abbott wrote. However, groups and individuals from outside the United States are not allowed to influence or interfere with the election process in Texas. This state has robust election laws that were carefully crafted to protect the integrity of our electoral system. All persons, including persons connected with OSCE, are required to comply with these laws. Well, that's very telling, isn't it? I mean, if you can trust anybody with freeness, fairness, democracy, and not discriminating against people, it's, Texas, right? Now, isn't this just so typical? These are the kinds of people, these politicians, not even necessarily the actual people of Texas, who demand that other foreign countries whose elections are questionable or even questionable just in their eyes, demand that election monitors go to these places and go through and put them through the ringer, watch them, set up web cameras, have somebody watching every polling booth, but then when it's them who need to be watched, all of a sudden it's like, no, you aren't welcome here, that's not necessary, we've got everything covered. Because if we've learned anything from the last, 10 years, at least 10 years, the U.S. is a total democracy, right? And there's been no contestment over elections in the last 10 years. Either We don't really know who won the election in 2000, the stealing of it in 2004, and the question as to whether or not the president was actually born in the country in 2008. So we do see a very clear pattern of questionable democratic practices, especially with these new voter ID laws and a lot of other draconian measures that have actually been brought out. And they feel that they don't need to be monitored. I mean, everybody else, even on the most superfluous of claims, they have to be monitored, but not them. I mean, these are the same kind of people who said, oh, the voting in Venezuela is a complete sham. Chavez is a complete dictator, and the elections are a fake. And then demand election monitors go in. Hugo Chavez opens the door and says, come in and watch our elections. You will see. Jimmy Carter goes in. He watches the elections and says, yes, they were free and fair. The actual companies that were going in and watching the elections, the organizations that were watching the elections said, yes, they're free and fair. Even the last one, the last election which Hugo Chavez won, his opponent said, yes, the elections were fair. And yet it still insisted that Venezuela must be a dictatorship. Why? Because they have extensive social policies, Bolivarian socialism. Because that's how it works in an America's mind. Socialism is therefore automatically totalitarian, even though it's a complete non sequitur that doesn't mean anything. But that repeatedly proven over and over again is a free and fair election, and they still insist it's a dictatorship. Yet here we clearly have at least one state that doesn't want anyone that's not a part of that same state to be able to monitor the elections. And should we also not consider this, should we consider this a coincidence that it just happens to be a heavily Republican state? Should we consider it a coincidence that it just happens to be the Ron Paul state? Should we? I don't know. Because it seems to me that the people who scream the most about everything being a dictatorship are Republicans. Yet these are also the same people that are first to scream against anything that would provide checks and balances. I mean, this is one of those kind of strange right-wing positions where they demand checks and balances, but then demand minimum government. I mean, to have people monitoring the government, you have to have people doing it. But regardless, this does show a tremendous hypocrisy, and one of the reasons why I really don't like Texas. It's just so typical. Everybody else is a dictatorship that's surrounding us, and they're evil, and they have to be monitored. But when there's questions at home, all of a sudden it's, no, you can't question us, everything's fine, go away. And if you dare even take a look at us, we'll arrest you. Because one good thing that shows what a democratic state you are is threatening to detain, arrest people, and charge people for watching over an election.